Lodging is a major problem in milling oat production, and that is especially true if you want to push yields by increasing nitrogen fertilizer application rates. Higher nitrogen rates can increase oat yields, but they can also lead to an unacceptable increase in oat lodging risk. That crop can end up flat, where you'll have lower yields, lower grain quality, and a more difficult time harvesting the crop. So, how can you push your yields, push your nitrogen rates, all the while maintaining or increasing grain quality and without increasing lodging risk? That's a question that motivated a 2-year research project that's being conducted in Eastern Ontario at the Winchester Research Station and in Northeastern Ontario at the New Liskeard Research Station. To push nitrogen rates in this trial, we settled on a rate of 80 pounds of nitrogen per acre. That's roughly double the recommended nitrogen rate for oats in this area, but it's not too crazy high. I think it's a realistic number, at least to shoot for. This nitrogen was split applied. Okay, so about 60 pounds of it was applied as urea pre-plant, and the remaining 20 was applied at flag leaf growth stage 39 as UAN, and that was applied with something akin to drop nozzles to avoid burning that flag leaf. And we didn't necessarily wait for rain to apply that UAN at growth stage 39 because July was a bit of a dry spell at both locations. Aside from nitrogen rate, we also used 3 different milling oat varieties across all the experiments. Those were Camden, Nicholas, and Nice. And we also applied a fungicide to all the experiments, and that was Trivapro A and B. So the first management practice we're looking at is row spacing, namely tightening up, narrowing that row spacing from what is typical in Ontario. So typical spring cereal row widths is roughly 7.5 inches, and we're testing the effect of tightening that up to 5 inches. Now, there's certainly been some discussion and chatter in the province, about reducing row widths to increase yield, and there's certainly evidence in winter wheat, outside of Ontario and possibly inside Ontario that narrow row spacings benefit yield. But in a crop like oats, which is relatively susceptible to lodging, at least in theory, narrow row spacings can actually increase lodging risk. All right, so when you reduce your row width, you're changing tillering characteristics, and also without getting into the details, you're also shading those lower leaves to a much greater degree at those narrower row widths. When you shade the lower leaves, you can possibly reduce the strength of that stem and of that root system, which will ultimately, make that crop more susceptible to lodging. So we're testing that here. Now, the next variable we're looking at is seeding rates. Aside from variety selection, manipulating your seeding rate is a top way a farmer can adjust the lodging resistance of their oat crop. Generally, lowering your seeding rate is going to increase lodging resistance, right? Those plants will have larger root systems, thicker stems, more resistant to lodging. And the reverse is also true. Higher seeding rates equal higher lodging risk. But at lower seeding rates, there is the possibility of a trade-off between yield and lodging risk. Right? You have lower seeds per acre, and possibly you'll have lower yield per acre. But those plants might also adjust by changing their tillering. And so, it's somewhat of an open question. What's this trade-off between yield and lodging risk across, high and low seeding rates? And so that's what we're testing here. Now, the next management practice we're looking at is seeding depth, which obviously, a farmer can adjust somewhat, on their drill or with whatever they're planting their oats with. In lots of areas where milling oats are grown in this province, farmers generally seed a bit more shallow than optimum. And they do that to get early even emergence to take full advantage of what is generally a limited or short growing season. And so there's a reason why they seed relatively shallow. However, again, in theory, shallow seeding of oats can possibly increase lodging risk. And without going into the details, the deeper the crown roots of that oat plant are, possibly the more lodging resistant it is. And so in certain fields or areas of fields that are prone to lodging, it might make sense to increase seeding depth. And so that's what we're testing the effect of seeding depth from 1 to 3 inches, again on yield and on lodging resistance and quality. So the next strategy we're looking at is very aggressive nitrogen splits. So your pre-plant applications or your very early in-season applications of nitrogen, they can increase crop height, make that crop taller, make those stems thinner, not as strong, and that the combination of that can really increase lodging resistance. But if you apply nitrogen, after stem elongation is done, once crop height is determined, can you apply nitrogen much later in season and still get that yield benefit without that, increase in lodging risk? So we're testing very aggressive nitrogen splits, at applying nitrogen just around heading or even later, and very high rates of nitrogen later in the season to test, to see if this is a possibility. Now, the final management practice we're investigating is the use of the plant growth regulator Modis. And here, the benefit of a PGR like Modis is that you can really push your nitrogen rates when you use like a plant growth regulator. So what we're testing here is nitrogen rates from 0 all the way to 150 pounds of nitrogen an acre. Okay, 5 different nitrogen rates, some going really crazy high. And we're looking at, can Modis, will Modis allow a farmer to really increase their nitrogen rates and maintaining, that lodging resistance that's very important for the oat crop. As a final word, I just want to thank a number of people. I want to thank the summer students and crop technicians that worked hard over the summer to make this trial a reality. I want to thank a number of farmers that I spoke to over the phone, farmers in Northern Ontario who gave me some really good ideas for this trial. And finally, I want to thank the sponsors of this experiment. A number of sponsors really across the whole oat value chain. So Grain Farmers of Ontario, PepsiCo, which is Quaker Oats, Syngenta, which manufactures Modis, and the Omafra U of G Alliance. So these sponsors came together for this trial, but it's not like any one sponsor is condoning the use of any other sponsor's product. So it's not like GFO or Grain Farmers of Ontario is saying Quaker Oats is the best miller, or Quaker Oats isn't saying Modis is the best plant growth regulator. It's just a number of sponsors that came together to support this trial.